Good evening from Westminster, where the House of Commons has voted in favour of delaying Brexit with just 15 days to go to the set date of the UK's departure from the European Union. The Prime Minister will now have to ask her fellow EU leaders to approve the delay. The parliamentary motion says that if a Brexit plan is agreed by MPs by next Wednesday, then the extension to the process would be relatively brief. If there's no deal agreed, the extension would be longer, and the UK might then have to take part in the European elections. Our political editor Laura Kuensberg reports on the series of votes taken in Parliament today and why they're likely to lead to a Brexit delay.
Speeding back to number 10, with Brexit going slow. The Prime Minister's voice that we could leave this month, isolated for weeks, now drowned out.
The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202.
MPs voting clearly to say Brexit should be delayed.
Thank you.
The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlocked.
Theresa May wasn't there to hear it read out loud, to face reality perhaps. Her government accepting we might not leave the EU before the end of June.
After the last few days of government chaos and some defeats, all of us now have the opportunity and the responsibility to work together to find a solution to the crisis facing this country. Mr. Speaker,
Labour has its own noisy struggles. The party says it wants another referendum, but wouldn't vote for one today.
the whole purpose ought to be to protect communities that are stressed and worried. Those people are worried about the future of their jobs and their industries. Our job is to try to meet the concerns of the people who sent us here in the first place.
Nor is the government ready to give up on the hope Brexit might happen before June.
Redouble our resolve to get this through and to deliver in what I very strongly believe is the national interest. And people do have strong views, of course they do, and in fact you want your politicians to have strong views. I've got a very strong view. My very strong view is that the Prime Minister's deal is the best way to deliver on the referendum result.
An extension is a step in the right direction because the government haven't brought this together after all this time. We still need to find a way through this.
Will Brexit be delayed, Chief Whip?
But again, number 10 can't contain Tory divisions. Anything cabinet remainers could do yesterday, Brexiteers seem to want to do better tonight. Yesterday, 4 of them voted against government policy. But tonight, 7 cabinet ministers split from Theresa May and voted against a delay. In this strange world, even the Brexit secretary went against the argument he'd publicly made.
Collective responsibility is very much alive as it should be, and that's what the public expect. They expect us to work together as a team to deliver the will of the people, and we've got to get on and do that. Thank you.
It doesn't seem like the Tory party's too united at the moment.
There was a rare, if maybe short-lived, sigh of relief for number 10.
The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 314.
They saw off by only 2 votes, an attempt by MPs to take charge of Brexit altogether.
I'm disappointed that my amendment lost by 2, but we have gained something this evening. A deal has been defeated again by a large margin. No deal under any circumstances has been defeated by Parliament, and the Prime Minister is going to have to apply for an extension.
And without Labour support, the independent group's push for another referendum was smashed. But while Brexit is now unlikely to happen on time,
We demand a people's vote!
and although the Prime Minister's deal has been chucked out twice, that doesn't mean she's giving up on getting it through Parliament. And might that be the sound of one of her allies, who says no right now, tiptoeing to yes?
When you come to the end of a negotiation, that's when you really start to see the whites of people's eyes, if you like, and you get down to the point where you make a deal. And we want to see a deal because we want a deal that's good for the whole of the United Kingdom, and that's what we're focusing on.
Not yet. Dozens of Brexiteers still believe the Prime Minister's deal with the EU is too close, too tightly bound. But tempers are fraying.
They are engaging in political idiocy. They are doing more to damage the prospect of us ever leaving the European Union than any of the people campaigning for a second losers vote or Remainers who haven't accepted the result. They are dangerously close to destroying the very thing it is that we all fought so long and hard to achieve.
That's what it's come down to, Tory MPs calling each other idiots, basically, saying that dozens of your colleagues are idiots.
No, I say they're engaging in political idiocy, which is exactly what it is.
If you don't fight for something you believe in, which is Brexit, then it seems to me you've given up the fight far too early. You shouldn't be in politics.
Just in case the Prime Minister didn't have enough woe at home, that supposed special friend couldn't help but pitch in too.
I'm surprised at how badly it's all gone from the standpoint of a negotiation. But I gave the Prime Minister my ideas on how to negotiate it, and I think you would have been successful. She didn't listen to that, and that's fine. I mean, she's got to do what she's got to do.
To do what she has to do? If only it were so simple. Number 10 must try to govern this mess and survive.
Well, in a moment, we'll be asking our Europe editor, Katja Adler, for her thoughts on the Brexit process after today's events. But first, let's talk to Laura, who's with me, our political editor. So can we say now that Brexit is not happening on the 29th of March?
Well, it politically seems impossible, and it seems that Theresa May has been forced to confront something that's become more and more and more likely. First of all, because of the delays in government over deciding how to handle Brexit. Second of all, the difficulties in getting a deal with the EU. And then third of all, with the fact that she has failed on 2 occasions to get her deal through. That said, 2 important things to understand too. A very large number of Tory MPs, ministers and cabinet ministers voted against any delay tonight. This wasn't a unanimous decision in Parliament by any stretch. A very clear one, but certainly not absolutely a slam dunk. The second point is, of course, as the law stands, it is still the case that we leave on the 29th of March, whatever happens. Now, the politics appear to have made that completely impossible. But there is still a chance that if this whole process somehow went pop, we could actually find ourselves in that situation. Unlikely though that is.
We'll talk about the Prime Minister's challenge in the next few days a little later in the programme, Laura. Thanks very much. But I'd like to go to Brussels now and bring in Katja. Looking ahead also to that summit that's taking place in a week's time, Katja. Any response there of any kind from the EU today to the events at Westminster?
Well, Hugh, you know, it's interesting because compared to all of the sound and the fury in Westminster tonight, the silence on EU leaders' Twitter accounts was deafening, and their voices count because when it comes to extending the Brexit process, they have the final say. Now, early in the week, we did have to hear from a number of EU leaders who were sounding pretty hard line, like from France and Spain, saying they would not be granting any extension to the Brexit process unless the Prime Minister could come up with a very good reason. Now, it's true, EU leaders are frustrated and irritated and fatigued with Brexit, but it's also true that if they can, they want to avoid a no-deal Brexit for their own political and economic interests. So perhaps EU leaders were silent tonight because they know whatever their personal opinions on an extension, they, under EU law, have to come to a unanimous decision about whether to grant it, for how long, and what conditions they want to attach. And they can't come to that unanimous decision until all 27 EU leaders are together in one room, which they will be, Hugh, in 1 week's time here in Brussels at that EU summit you mentioned. And I think when it comes to that, realpolitik will probably take over, and whether it's a longer extension or a shorter one, if the Prime Minister can persuade the EU that she does have that deal coming over the line, EU leaders will probably say yes, even if it's through gritted teeth.
Katja, many thanks again. Katja Adler there for us in Brussels. So after today's votes, there is a sharp focus on next week when MPs here will be asked to change their minds and to back Theresa May's deal. And then, of course, as Katja was saying, that crucial summit of European leaders that could determine the length of an extension to the Brexit process. Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, has been looking at how the next stages might unfold.
Another concession, another retreat by Theresa May. MPs have delayed Brexit past March the 29th. They don't know for how long, and nor do we. Mrs May never wanted this, but she's been weakened by defeat after defeat in the Commons. Now, with less than a week to go before the next EU summit, her mission somehow to win around 75 or more Tory Brexiteers, Democratic Unionists, leave supporting Labour MPs who want a Brexit deal. It's a big ask. So Theresa May will be calling another another big debate, another big vote before she faces EU leaders and asks for the delay in leaving. So just days. Time is running out to finally support this battered Prime Minister or start to thrash out a new Brexit plan. In Brussels next week, EU leaders must decide whether to grant a Brexit delay at all. Signs are they will, but there may be strings attached. Will France impose conditions? Will Spain, where elections are on the way, reopen the sovereignty of Gibraltar? And crucially, will they insist on a long delay, a year or more, till the Brits agree on Brexit? MPs decided against voting on Brexit alternatives next week, but they still remain. So aside from Mrs May's plan, what are the other options MPs will try to drum up support for behind the scenes? Well, some on both sides, including cabinet ministers like Amber Rudd, would like a Brexit closer to the EU, a bit like Norway's, sticking with EU market rules and standards, maybe also the EU customs system. No new trade tariffs or border checks, no problem avoiding stops and checks on the Irish border. But it also means no new trade deals around the world. Jeremy Corbyn and Labour want a customs union. He says he can negotiate terms to his liking. Then there's another referendum. MPs were never likely to back a referendum this evening, but the so-called People's Vote campaigners will be back. Tonight, the Prime Minister's last best hope is that all her defeats, all her concessions will pave the way to a deal. That fear of a long delay, the possibility of being tied to EU rules, fear even of a referendum will persuade or scare MPs into backing her deal as the best available. Some legal guidance from the Attorney General that the UK might be able to legally break with EU rules if Britain feels trapped. That might help rebels climb down too. If she wins, it'll be a triumph. Britain could begin the even tougher task of discussing the future after Brexit, even if many Tory MPs and ministers are saying quietly that'll be a job for a new Prime Minister, that Mrs May's time may have all but run out.
Let's have a final word with Laura on today's event. So we have a week to this summit, and then in the meantime, the Prime Minister's going to try once again to get her deal through.
That's right. On either Monday or Tuesday, the deal that really means everything to this government will be back in front of MPs for another judgment. Will it be third time lucky or another very unlucky outing for Theresa May? And just let's remember what it represents. It represents a deal that has been put together at great political cost and pain by this government and 27 other countries. But it is a deal that is hated by a great number of the Conservative Party's own MPs, and all of the opposition parties at this stage in the game are saying they will vote against it too. Now, there are perhaps some nibbling signs around the edges of some MPs in the Tory party and some of the Prime Minister's allies in the Northern Irish Unionist Party moving towards backing her deal, but there's nothing certain about that. Nothing certain at all. And the Prime Minister may well be looking at another defeat next week, and then off she'll go to Brussels looking for something, some kind of change that might, guess what, give her a reason to have another go before our original intended departure date. But the other thing is this has all been so rocky and also difficult and also personally, politically costly for the Prime Minister. There are now, in small number, some people openly speculating about whether or not she will have to sacrifice her leadership and quit in order to get this through.
OK, Laura, once again, thanks very much. Laura Kinsberg there, our political editor.
Good evening. The date, March the 29th, has been scored into the national psyche for months. Across the UK, all sorts of important decisions, in business especially and in people's ordinary lives, have been altered or put on hold until after Brexit. And yet today, here in the House of Commons, MPs voted to delay it. EU leaders may not agree. If they do, quite how long the delay will be still has to be worked out. And what's more, when MPs vote again on Brexit next week, it will be on Mrs May's original deal for the third time of asking. In the most dramatic of today's votes that split the Conservative Party down the middle, MPs narrowly failed to seize control of the departure process. In the final vote, 7 cabinet ministers voted against the Prime Minister, including the Brexit Secretary himself, Stephen Barclay. He had actually closed the debate on the motion to delay.
Order. Something unusual happened for the Prime Minister today.
The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202.
Yes, she won a vote. Except, as usual with Brexit, the victory wasn't what you might call sweet, because she persuaded MPs to back a motion that makes it possible, some might say probable, that Brexit will be delayed at least till the end of June. And it was only a few days ago that the Prime Minister regarded any delay as toxic. And after her so-called victory, which came about even though more Tory MPs voted against her than with her, she was nowhere to be seen. But he jumped to his feet.
After the last few days of government chaos and some defeats, all of us now have the opportunity and the responsibility to work together to find a solution. I also reiterate our support for a public vote, not as a political... Mr. Speaker, not as political point scoring, but as a realistic option to break the deadlock.
Now, perhaps the most important vote of the day was on an amendment put down by this senior Labour MP, who wants all MPs to wrest control from the Prime Minister of what kind of Brexit, if any, we have.
We have to find a way of agreeing a plan that can command majority support. And the Prime Minister is correct when she says that in the end the House must be in favour of something. Now, there are a number of different ways that this can be done, including holding a series of votes on different options.
Now, this Tory former minister may have been speaking for the entire nation.
This is an important debate today, but I have to say I think most people listening to it and watching it in the public are probably losing the will to live, as I am, when it comes to finding a route forward on Brexit.
And here was the Brexit Secretary winding up for the Prime Minister.
It is time for this House to act in the national interest. It is time to put forward an extension that is realistic. I commend the motion put forward by the government.
But guess what? When it came to the actual vote, he voted against his boss, the Prime Minister. Extraordinary. And what about backbenchers' coup, the attempt to take control of shaping Brexit?
The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 314.
Well, they failed by just 2 votes. So now the Prime Minister will have another attempt to push her plan for Brexit over the line with a third so-called meaningful vote next week. Which fills this former Tory, who tried and failed today to get MPs to support a new referendum, with despair.
We know the Prime Minister's plan is to keep running the clock down until we've got our toes over the edge, and the only option then will be to either back her deal or fall into a catastrophic no deal.
A special emergency cabinet meeting at lunchtime today. The naughty ministers, Amber Rudd, Greg Clark and David Gauke on the left, the Gawkwood squad, who defied the Prime Minister in a vote last night, but against all convention, weren't sacked. This man, the Chief Whip, was furious with them. Now, the Health Secretary is never disloyal.
We've been trying to deliver on the result of the referendum. That's what we're trying to achieve. It is still just possible to do that with the Prime Minister's deal by the 29th of March. And what passed today is the provision to do that, or if necessary, to have a short technical extension. The alternative of a long extension, I think, would be a disaster. People want us to get on with this.
Home for a Prime Minister still under the weather, but tonight daring to dream that she may still get her deal through, even though the prospect of us leaving the EU on time is close to nil. Robert Peston, News at 10.
So now we know that MPs will be back here next week to vote again, as Robert was talking about, on Mrs May's deal. But what happens after that here and in Brussels? Libby Wiener takes us through it step by step.
We're very clear. We will be leaving the EU on the 29th of March 2019 at 11 p.m. We will be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. We're leaving the European Union and we're leaving on the 29th of March 2019.
A date etched on her mind, now likely to be scrubbed out of history. But will delay change anything? One pro-Brexit MP said the Prime Minister should use the time and go back to Brussels and get more concessions.
This is the compression end of the negotiation time period when these things can become possible. But you have to ask for things in a negotiation. You can't just expect people to offer things if you don't even ask for them.
But others suggested that the narrow defeat for Parliament taking control meant the Prime Minister would have to start listening.
Actually gives Parliament the opportunity to do what she's been challenging us to do, which is to tell her what we will agree to, that isn't just her deal, or no Brexit. There are other alternatives. She's never given the chance for us to vote on them.
So what happens next? It's expected the Prime Minister will bring her deal back to the Commons for a third meaningful vote by next Wednesday. If she wins, she's likely to ask the European Council meeting later that week for a short technical delay. But if she loses again, she may have to ask for a much longer one, well beyond the new departure date that MPs voted for today. One Tory MP had this message for his colleagues tonight: forget the bickering and just back the deal.
We need to deliver on Brexit. We need to deliver on the mandate that the British people gave us in 2016. We said we would respect their decision. They told us what they wanted. We need to get on. We need to implement it. Some Julie Garland Brexit, that's something that's always somewhere over the rainbow, is no good to us.
But winning tonight's votes will have provided some relief for the Prime Minister, according to one former advisor.
Actually, you enjoy these moments when it seems like a little bit of an upside. So possibly she's having a G&T, a wry smile with the rest of the team as they go through yet another day. And then it's straight into planning, and how do you move forward from that?
Not losing the definition of a good day for Theresa May now. Libby Vina, News at 10, Westminster.
So that's the timetable of the next few days. The timetable for the UK's departure now, as Libby says, rests with European leaders. Our Europe editor, James Mates, is in Brussels to take us through, James, what the reaction has been so far from the EU tonight.
Well, it's pretty mixed. They've known this has been coming. Now it's here. It's completely clear this decision is not in our hands. The EU Commission's statement in the light of the vote reminded London that this decision requires unanimity. They said they will give priority to the functioning of the EU institutions, not to Britain's needs, and that they will take into account the reasons for and the duration of such an extension. And other voices are making similar sceptical noises. Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister. Theresa May has no better friend here in Europe than Mark Rutte. He spoke about how London had been whining on and going around in circles, and asked about this extension for what and to what end. So that gives you a pretty good idea of the scepticism. Some of it also concern about what Britain would do during an extension period when it would retain a veto and voting power. Europe is about to have to set itself a new budget for the next few years. It doesn't want Britain being difficult during that because they've left it with veto power over their budget process.
So what happens then, James, when she turns up next week in Brussels?
A lot will depend on whether she's asking for a short or a long extension. The long extension may be more problematic. Now, Donald Tusk, who is the President of the Council, he was the one who will try and get a unanimous view around that table in here in 1 week's time. He said tonight, I will appeal to the EU27 to open a long discussion if the UK finds it necessary to rethink its Brexit strategy. And that's going to be crucial. They are going to say to Mrs May, when she turns up, what are you going to do with this time, this extra year or whatever it's going to take? Because if they are not convinced that there is something that is substantially going to change, there is a very real chance that they'll say, no, we're not prepared to go through another year, 18 months, 2 years of this. And she would leave here, much as she left that Salzburg summit a month or two ago, with nothing, facing the fact that 1 week after she leaves here, Britain will be leaving, however Westminster votes.
James, thank you very much for that. Well, the Prime Minister is no doubt up to her ears in advice on a way forward today. She got a little bit more. The unmistakably blunt thoughts of President Trump came booming across the Atlantic. During a meeting in the White House with Ireland's Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, he said he was surprised at how badly the Brexit negotiations had gone. If only Mrs May had listened to him, he said.
Ahead of St Patrick's Day celebrations, the Irish Taoiseach was visiting the White House, and it gave the President the chance to weigh in on Brexit. candidly admitting that, like so many others, he is struggling to understand what on earth is going on.
He's in a very complicated position right now because of Brexit. You're going to have to tell me what's happening. You're going to have to perhaps tell the world what's happening, because I'm not sure anybody knows. But it's a very complex thing that's going on right now. It's tearing a country apart. It's actually tearing a lot of countries apart. And it's a shame that it has to be that way. But
after that stark assessment of an ally's political predicament, he then assailed the Prime Minister's negotiating tactics, although he shares her view about how unwise a second referendum would be.
I'm surprised at how badly it's all gone from the standpoint of a negotiation. But I gave the Prime Minister my ideas on how to negotiate it, and I think you would have been successful. She didn't listen to that, and that's fine. I mean, she's got to do what she's got to do, but I think it could have been negotiated in a different manner, frankly. I hate to see everything being ripped apart right now. I don't think another vote would be possible, because it would be very unfair to the people that won. They'd say, what do you mean you're going to take another vote? So that'll be tough.
We have a different opinion, President. I regret that Brexit's happening, and the UK was a really important part of the European Union, but they're going now, and that's their decision.
The two leaders were then on Capitol Hill, meeting prominent Irish-American lawmakers. But here too there is no greater clarity on where Britain is heading. The President's description of the UK as being ripped and torn apart is pretty extraordinary, but it does reflect the bafflement in Washington about Brexit and Britain's reputation for political pragmatism and institutional stability that now is in serious jeopardy. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
Well, to help us digest this third day of unprecedented drama here in Westminster, here's Robert Peston. As we've been hearing, Theresa May is bringing back this deal for a third time next week. There are questions about whether she should be allowed to do that in the first place. What chances has she got of getting it through?
Well, as you know, Julie, if these were normal circumstances, that would be the nuttiest of questions. I mean, pretty much the deal she's going to put to them next, we think, Tuesday, is a deal she put to them a few weeks ago, and she lost by 230 votes, a record. And then she put it to them again a few days ago and lost by 149 votes, which is also enormous by all standards. So she's got to persuade 75 MPs to change their minds. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible, but it's only a bit more likely than the England football team picking me to be their centre forward.
OK, let's just park that thought with your football metaphors there. If she fails, then what next?
So, she has to go to an EU Council, a meeting with other EU leaders at the end of next week, and she would, according to the motion that was passed today, she would have to ask them for an extension to Brexit. Now, my EU sources say they will then turn to her and say, well, what's it for? And she'll say, I'm not 100% sure, because we don't actually know what kind of Brexit we want. She'll then come back to this country, and on Monday she has promised that she will start the process of sounding out MPs about whether there is a form of Brexit that they could coalesce around, or indeed if they want a referendum. And then there could well be an emergency summit at the end of that week, literally a day or so before we're due to crash out the EU. The honest answer, as I've said too many times on this programme and elsewhere, is we don't know where we are going. We do know today, I think, that we are not crashing out on the 29th of March, and that there almost certainly will be a delay. But whether we ever get a managed Brexit is still uncertain. We could get a referendum, and just to be clear, my central prognosis is still, in the absence of those people over there making up their minds about what they want, a no-deal Brexit at some point, maybe a few months away, is still a very real risk.
Because it is the default, and it's worth underlining.
Because it is the default position, and the Prime Minister has made absolutely clear she will not eliminate that default.
OK, so back here for the big vote early next week, Robert.
Can't wait.
Thank you very much. I bet you can't, Robert. Thank you very much indeed for now for that.